Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to walk you through the process of this particular rendering I was working on, which is a Ferrari 275 GTB. I did this as a full version video. There'll be a link somewhere if you wanted to watch the full length video. I believe it's 2.5 hours. This particular car is one of my all-time favorite cars. I love the shape of the long nose front end V12 Ferraris. It's just kind of a timeless shape. I wouldn't normally come up with hot rod ideas for a car like this, but it's nice to kind of create content that's a little bit unusual. So for something like this, I'm going to do a two-tone paint job and I'm going to oversize the wheels slightly just because I kind of want to play with the idea of if I was going to do something different, if somebody was going to ask me to do something different, what would I actually do and what would that look like? That is the purpose of design renderings, really, is to come up with ideas that are hopefully outside the box to kind of help visualize something before we go too far in the real world. The particular paper I'm working on is Canson Pro Layout. It's 14 by 17. It's a fantastic marker paper, super bright white. I use many different types of marker papers, and this is just an example of one of those. There's a reason to use one type versus another, and it's a bit case by case. We'd have to get into that on a different video for sure. The initial sketch is line weighted with black Bic Pen, and that's really just for demo purposes. You'll see that the actual sketch that I'm going to use is a thinner, cleaner outline in blue Bic Pen. It's still Bic Pen. Another video that I should probably do later is why Bic Pen versus pencil, for example. And the clean outline is actually an overlay. If you can take our initial drawing where I knew I had some rough things that I wanted to correct in the final artwork, and put that under the final sheet that I'm going to use and trace over all the stuff that I want to keep and then make some changes in the final drawing. So this is referred to as an overlay. This is something that can also be done digitally with layers, for example. This is just the practical version of that with literal layers of paper. For the markers, I use Chartpak AD markers to block in some colors here. I use many different types of markers, just like I use many types of paper, just like I use many types of paint. There's not one answer for everything for me. I like to have a huge variety because depending on what I'm working on or the speed I need to accomplish something, different materials are going to perform at different rates. So everything kind of has its strong points and weak points, and some things have its compromises. So it's really kind of about the end result. But in this instance, I'm using AD markers to block out the areas. I don't tend to do very much blending with markers, mostly because I prefer to do the softest transition work with Airbrush. This could also be achieved with color pencil blending or with chalks or pastels. And the end result that you're after is really up to you. I just prefer Airbrush because back when I was doing custom painting on cars and motorcycles, I spent years learning how to do it. So to have that knowledge and be able to apply it now is really great. And it also saves me a lot of time with the marker blending as well. And I actually don't think that marker blending can get to the level of airbrush blending with the same level of vibrancy. So rather than trying to compromise one material to do everything, I'll use a little bit of everything to kind of get the best out of every single piece that I can. Another important thing about using markers is you want to be really deliberate and confident with your marks. You want to make clean lines, overlap them slightly so they can bleed together to create a solid color. If you're blending with marker, the rules there are slightly different, and I'll have to get into that on another video, but it's important to make really fully saturated passes, work these little blocks until they're clean and full, but you can also overdo it, so this takes a little bit of practice and a little bit of trial and error. And naturally, you should always test your markers on a test sheet of the exact same type of paper that you're using as well. You want to make sure that the marker is good, the color is correct, and it's going to work on the paper that you're using. After the marker is all done, the next thing I'm going to do is a bit of airbrushing. I already mentioned that the reason I airbrush is to kind of bring those soft transitions in. To create the look of gloss and depth, you need some hardline shapes and some soft line shapes. And I like to use the airbrush to transition all those areas and also to create color shift, as is sometimes necessary for certain colors. I'm airbrushing with acrylic paints, and this is really great because it's going to dry really fast. I can keep moving very quickly, but I do have to be careful not to oversaturate the paper too quickly. Marker paper tends to be a little bit thin, and papers in general are very delicate, so you can warp the paper if you are too aggressive with the airbrush. So you want to be careful, build up your colors really carefully, and let everything dry. Acrylics also tend to be incredibly vibrant, so we'll get these really nice colors out of it. And I'll go over almost everything that I have in marker as well, just to kind of bring the color saturation up a little bit and kind of get all the color families to kind of tie in a little bit. After the airbrush is dry, the next thing I'm going to do is pick out some color pencils and start to do some of the detail areas. In this example, I'm using Prismacolor pencil. Again, I don't always use Prismacolor, but in this example I am, based on some of the things that I'm trying to achieve. And what I'll do is I'll start to bring in some of the edges for the window trim or some of the vents. I might hit with just a little bit of pencil, and it starts to become a roadmap for where I might make some of the hard outlines later or some of the bright highlights later. If I can kind of put some of those base tones down in pencil, then I don't have to do as much guesswork on the next stage. So as I'm doing the pencil, I'm starting to find some of the edges and highlights that I want to do in the next stage. I'm also going to use a little bit of purple or a little bit of yellow towards the bottom of the car just to start bringing some other color interest into the entire illustration. If colors are too bland and boring, then the illustration isn't that exciting. And the job here is to not only sell a cool idea and illustrate it well, but also have some visual punch. And we don't have to do everything based in reality necessarily. We want to do something that ultimately feels really cool in the end. Not only just the idea, but as a piece of artwork, it should look really fun. Once the pencil is finished up, the next thing I move on to is the hand-painted highlights. For this, I'm going back to acrylic again, and sometimes I'll also use AcrylaGouache. One of the things I really like about AcrylaGouache is it's kind of the best of both worlds. Gouache is really workable for a short amount of time, and then it dries as an acrylic gouache would. It's a combination of both materials, obviously. So it's really opaque and is diluted with water. So it's a really simple material that has a lot of range. And they tend to dry a really nice matte, which is great. So I'm going to outline some of the areas where I think I need to have harsher lines or harsher edges, or outline the trim a little bit more rigidly, and then start to drop in all the bright highlights. And towards the end of the details, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint in the wheel spokes. To me, wheel spokes are kind of like basic math plus perspective. So break down the entire wheel into 4 areas, make the X, break down that area, split it in half, break down that area, split it in half. It's basic math so long as you don't just start on one end and assume you're going to land at the right spot on the other end. Split everything up and then split that area up and then split that area up. Just keep it really simple and break it down to the most simple method and build from there. Once you have a basic set of spokes, you can build from that very organically without worrying about overcrowding the wheel or something like that. If you just guess, it's going to look like you're just guessing. And about the last thing that I'm going to do here is put in what I call a background block. Sometimes I do this with a solid color, sometimes I'll do it with airbrushing. It kind of depends on the piece, and a lot of times I won't even include it at all. It depends on time and how I feel about the overall composition. In this case, I'm just kind of putting a few gray lines down to create this block in the back, and what I call it is kind of a picture-in-picture look. You're kind of framing the artwork a little bit, but it's also giving the vehicle a little bit of depth. It's standing in front of the block, so you kind of get a little bit of sense of depth, and because the car is at an angle in this particular composition, you also get a little bit of motion at the same time. So just kind of trying to round out the piece a little bit. And the last step, of course, is to sign the name, and that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hopefully it's informative. I would love to start making some of these videos about these more in-depth topics and break them down into their own pieces. Just because doing these all as one thing is sort of overwhelming. And I think it's too much information oftentimes to capture. So I'm always open to suggestion. If there's areas or techniques that you guys want me to tackle and show in demos, I'd love to do that. Please let me know in the comments below. And please, if you could, like and subscribe. Thank you guys.